Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Privacy Podcast. I'm Ben Schiller from Maiden, and I'm joined today by Wayne Chang from Spruce ID. How are you doing?
Really great to be here.
Good. And we're actually recording this in Denver during ETH Denver, so have you had a good time here?
Yeah, it's been great. I think that the builder energy is back.
Yeah.
I think people who seriously care about building out the ecosystem and getting those use cases into market, like they're still working hard. I'm glad to see that.
Well, I have to say, some people have been poo-pooing ETH Denver and Denver this year, but I've had a pretty good time, and there's still a lot of great people here, including yourself. So thanks very much for being here. So your startup, Spruce ID, it's a digital ID startup. What exactly do you do? Just give us a quick summary.
Yeah. So our mission is to let users control their data. Instead of people signing into platforms that control everything about them, we want the platforms to ask users for permission to access their stuff. And you should be able to control your data flows like a water faucet, and it's under your control, right? So that's always been the mission of Spruce ID and how we envision the internet to work for people, right? And how we've gotten there, getting towards there, it's a long journey. We started out building something called Sign In with Ethereum. It's the idea that you can use your blockchain account to access a website. And you don't have to go through an intermediary that can deplatform you, right? You can just use your blockchain account that you control, either through your keys or a smart contract that can have many forms of authentication to it, and use that to log into a website. So your blockchain account becomes more than just financial transactions. It's the idea of being able to access your stuff and control your data as well, right? So Sign In with Ethereum was the first entry point towards that. And we found a lot more traction after that, after building a lot of early open source libraries, including for digital credentials. Surprise, that's what people want to bring when they go to a website. They want to prove facts about themselves. So they're not just a rando on the internet. They're, a resident of a state, or they're an accredited investor, or any of these attributes that make your experience way better without oversharing, right? So this experience working with digital credentials, cryptographic-based authentication, led us to work with some governments, actually. This happened on a timeline sooner than I thought. I thought that if we really care about people controlling their data, then what's the most important data to give to users to control? System of records. Governments, financial institutions, healthcare establishments, and these are the biggest impact kind of things to give users more control. It's so crazy to me that people will not get surgeries, or they won't be able to see doctors, and sometimes they die because they have their healthcare data locked in some silo, right? And that's just confounding. And I think that it shouldn't be that case. So working towards the world where you can have everything in one place and control it, that's really, what we're trying to do.
Right. Personal data is not accessible to us. It's not controlled by us. It's not in an easy place for us to use it on the internet. What are the other problems around ID today? And how did we get in this kind of crazy, messy situation?
Yeah, well, ID is kind of a patchwork, and kind of like security when you're building systems. Unfortunately, it's one of the last places that people start thinking about. They're like, oh, wait, and how do I make this secure too, right? Like we see OpenClaw just launching, and then we see one thing that's like, oh, everything on OpenClaw can be accessed with this one API key that got leaked, right? So a lot of the times it's an afterthought. And if you talk to enterprises and corporations and even some governments, they're like, no, we just want to mitigate our costs and find more ways to generate more revenue. And so security is kind of one of those, bucket items that gets left behind. And as a result, a lot of the times this gets patchworked into existence, right? A really good example is kind of like how we have digitized identification in the financial sector, where people are just uploading JPEGs of their passports as identification. And anyone who's used generative AI knows that you can generate these things, right? Maybe the mainstream bots will be like, hey, can't let you do that, Dave. But we see so many opportunities where there's open source AI, there's $500 billion of AI factories happening in the US. This compute will make it somewhere for someone to generate your passport and even a picture of your selfie, right? And this can be used to break existing systems.
I mean, this is how we justify our existence in the world today. I mean, it sounds like it's not safe at all.
I think that we are going to reach a precipice moment where a lot of these attacks get cheap enough to execute at scale, right? And attackers can be very good. For a while, we've seen only very targeted attacks work, right? Like someone wants to spoof a specific individual, like the CFO of an organization, to convince people to release funds. This actually happened for, I think, an organization in Hong Kong where they sent like $25 million or something to fraudsters because, they were able to deep fake the whole team. It's like a Zoom meeting, everyone was fake, right? And I think that it will be more than just targeted attacks. It's going to just increase in magnitude because of how cheap compute is getting, how good these models are getting, right? And the problem is that we haven't really taken a first principles look at how does identity work? How should identity work in society? As a result, we have a bunch of circumstantial, well, I guess this will work. I guess if you take a picture of it, it's fine. And a lot of these things, as we are finding out, won't actually be fine in the new world.
So from your point of view, what is the ideal version of digital ID? If you were designing a system from scratch today, how would you do it?
Yep. I can't claim authorship for all of the thinking, but the patterns that I really like is the work coming out of Utah. So there have been a lot of advocates over the years thinking about what does an identity system come from? And I think it has to come from the people and society first and foremost. And whenever you're focusing on that, we think about policy. Right? We think about how ought a system be before we get to the technicals of are we using zero knowledge? Are we using just selective disclosure? No, what are the core societal tenets that we can agree upon that we think will create a sound system that enshrine control to users, right? And the Utah state-endorsed digital identity efforts, first introduced by Senate Bill 260, signed into law by Governor Cox last spring. And then now we have a new bill passed through committee, Senate Bill 275, which talks about more specific requirements for what we expect out of an identification system. And one of the important cruxes of this is that, hey, the government doesn't issue your identity. You already have one when you're born, your parents name you, and your community recognizes who you are, right? And whatever the government can give you, it can take away. So it doesn't really make sense if you're just thinking a very human-centric view of it, right? And I think this human-centricness is really great. In fact, it's almost fully aligned with what the ACLU recommended for state-level legislative recommendations for digital identity. The fact that it is an endorsement, the fact that the government can endorse your identity in a way that's useful to you if you meet its requirements. And if you do it, it's not going to track you. It's going to prevent data oversharing. It's going to have additional protections to keep it safe. It's a constitutionally inspired framework for how digital identity systems ought to be developed, right? And then we can get to what are the tech pieces that make this useful, use cases that are really beneficial to people at scale.
So the way the internet's kind of come up today is kind of be technology first, and then we try and sort of do some policy. You were saying it should be the other way around.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, what's the identity system for most people today? It's their email and their password, and your email is owned by one of the large providers, right? And what if they decide you shouldn't exist one day, which has happened, right? So I think that in order to really enshrine a human-centric view on things, we ought to think, how do we start with the individual?
Right. Is there any chance that other states will adopt Utah's lead there?
I think so. There was something called the SETI Summit that happened last fall. We had representation from 12 different states, legislators, technology executives learning what is this framework. There's the technology approach where many states are kind of copying and pasting the idea of a digital driver's license. And I think it almost gets it right in terms of if you look at all the documents around how a digital driver's license ought to be used, organizations that do enshrine privacy, but we can't just have that be in the user manual or the implementation guidelines because they're guidelines. It'd be great to have that as a law, right?
Right. How does new technology aid with this new policy that you're talking about?
Yeah, so a lot of the things that we want from the policy idea, like we want a type of decentralization where the government is one of many possible actors that can issue a credential, right, that you can use. Just like how the government is one of the many actors that can host a web page and share it, right? It uses HTML to encode the web page, and it uses HTTP and TLS. These are open protocols that the internet is built on to share it. But the government's not the only organization that can publish websites, not by a long shot. Anyone can, right? And you might give extra credence to the websites that come from the government because they have official communications and things that are meaningful and important. But I think that that anyone can also launch a website has just been amazing for the amount of creativity, new industries, economy that's been driven, right? There's an incredible amount of innovation that's possible and more control and the ability for users to say, hey, I want a website. Just like how users can say, maybe I want a wallet and I want to choose what wallet is given to me, whether I'm holding crypto assets or digital credentials. Maybe I even want to build my own wallet, right? So building things around decentralized protocols that are permissionless, totally important. And I think that's why there's such a simile to a lot of the things happening in the Web3 space.
So some of those Web3 ideas are going more sort of mainstream in terms of identity potentially.
Yeah, I think some of the earliest work on so-called self-sovereign identity, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that, it depends on your interpretation, but my interpretation is not that we ought to get rid of all the governments. I think that that's an extremist interpretation. I think that the governments could be one of the most important players to bootstrap such a system. And most public servants I talk to really just want to help their constituents and don't really want to make big central data silos. In fact, they're terrified of that. I mean, the U.S. federal government had a big hack that basically unleashed a bunch of top secret files about people's backgrounds and interviews. This was the OMB hack that you can look up. And I think it's good to keep it more decentralized. I think public servants just want people to have good access to services and keep a reliable system around.
Correct.
So if we pick permissionless protocols that they are an actor in, maybe an important actor, but also industry can participate, individuals, that is exactly the same premise of something like mainnet Ethereum or a bunch of the other blockchains that you're seeing, right? People can interact with it in a variety of ways.
What about the economic incentives? Because surely, we've lacked a good digital ID system because there are companies out there that want us to be public figures, basically harvesting our data.
This has been the biggest challenge for digital identity. Like, what is the business model, right? And I think that some compelling answers to this has been preventing fraud because a lot of financial institutions just cover the fraud themselves. Right, so they lose money; it's their fault. They have this like slush fund. They're like, okay, we're gonna pay over like $50 million of the money that went away. It's cost of doing business, right? So we can move those numbers down, right, while increasing privacy and convenience for users. There are a lot of win-win-win scenarios that people are happy to switch their systems over for. But a lot of the requirement for this is to make sure that the security is aligned with the digital rights, is aligned with the regulations, right? And I think that we have a unique opportunity as an industry over the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years. There's a real open policy window to make a lot of great improvements to the financial institutions and privacy.
And when you say industry, you mean the privacy industry or?
I think the financial sector.
Financial sector,
yeah.
And are financial institutions taking up these ideas that you
certainly.
Proposing, yeah?
I think so. So I'll point to some work with NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology. They have a wonderful program called the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. Any policymakers, please give NIST more money on this investment. I know that we don't like more spending, but like this one, I think is great ROI for everyone. And they talk about how does one use digital credentials for things like financial KYC, right? And if you think about it, it makes a ton of sense because if a bank is accepting JPEGs of your driver's license, right, that can be generated.
It's a huge compliance cost there.
Yeah. And like, it's so ridiculous to me that a human has to look at the JPEG in some policy implementations and they're like, yep, that looks like a JPEG to me. But none of the security mechanisms for physical driver's license is valid in that context, right? Can't bend it, can't smell it, can't activate the holograms or the UV activated lines, right? So what are we doing, right? It just happened to work for a while. It's just not the right matching impedance for the digital world. We need to move to systems that AI can't defeat. And the properties that we've discovered so far that AI can't defeat, cryptography, like what blockchains are built on, they can't forge digital signatures to our knowledge, especially post-quantum ones. They can't show up in person to get something like a driver's license or a passport, a necessary step in many forms of identification. And also, they can't spoof complicated algorithms like liveness checks that are based on physics. They can't outcompute the physics of light flashing on your face or moving around to show that you're a human and not a deep fake. So these are the new primitive building blocks that security programs have to be built on. And fortunately, digital credentials bring a ton of them.
And do you think digital credentials are also necessary for kind of adoption of blockchains as well? That would make it easier.
I think it would make a huge difference. So I worked at a company called Consensus several years ago.
Consensus, yeah.
With a Y, not the conference, but the company behind MetaMask, right? And brilliant folks there. And we were working on a lot of different renditions of network economies, cryptographic token models, how these systems would play and create public utilities, better markets, etc. We found a few missing things at the time. This was like in 2017. Transactions weren't fast enough. They were too expensive. We haven't solved privacy yet in terms of blockchain, so everyone could see the amounts that you were sending around. And identity. Think about like a decentralized ride-sharing service. Don't you just want to pay the cost of matching you to a driver, right? Like, why is there a percentage take on it, right? And well, platforms are useful when they provide some useful middleman services, which do exist, like having trust and safety and a whole bunch of other elements. So if you want a decentralized, efficient version of that, you need to meet adequate regards for each of those things, right? And identity was consistently a missing pillar. You don't want to get into a car just because you know it's like a black Honda Civic pulling up. You want to know the person's qualified to drive, that they haven't had too many bad marks on their driving history, insurance, the car has been serviced, whole litany of things, right? And they want to know that you're not going to be this crazy rider that does chaotic things in their car. So that level of trust where you can bring that peer-to-peer allows for more efficient transacting, right? And more private. So you don't need a central vessel to kind of see everything.
Right.
Maybe we'll put some data in escrow in case the ride doesn't go how we thought. And then either of us can decide to reveal to a counterparty.
How do you mean data in escrow? How's that work?
So what I mean by that is there are more sophisticated data sharing models that are possible when we're thinking about controlling the data and having provenance for the data. So I could be like, okay, let's agree to have our digital proofs of presence, maybe your passport, maybe my passport, and we're going to put it into a cryptographic box, right? And either one of us can decide to unlock it and send it to someone if we want to,
right? Or
we can just both agree to keep it private, right? So there are new modes of interaction involved in this, and to enable this, you can imagine a smart contract, right? Like we can have an unlocking key in a multisig, and that can be used to produce something to unlock the box,
right?
So a lot of these concepts we'll kind of revisit. And in fact, in identity, we encounter many problems where sort of a shared substrate, like a ledger, would be very useful. Things like revocation list, or let's say that we have several states, each issuing digital credentials. How do we know that's them? How do we know which key is tied to which state? Is there sort of a record? And what data schemas can we follow? There's a lot of common knowledge problems that we could solve.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much, Wayne, for joining us on the Privacy Podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much. Really grateful to be here.